Right.
So I kind of said, have you ever thought about going to church? And so we started there, and he kind of was, I'm not sure, I don't know, I live a pretty crazy life. And I said, well, it's not about the life you live, it's about surrendering to Jesus. And he said, surrendering to Jesus, what does that mean?
All right, well, welcome to Biblical Conversations Testimonies. I'm here with Aiden. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Cory.
All right, excellent. Well, we're going to have some fun here in this segment. And just to set the table for what this is all about. So this is really an up-close and personal chat, sharing testimonies about how the training and tools of the cross current have really equipped all sorts of Christians with what they need to enjoy more confident conversational evangelism, but specifically with family, friends, work associates, which we're going to talk to you about. So I'm looking forward to hearing just you testify here, man. How and when did you become a Christian? I mean, just to sort of start, that's a great place to start a gospel conversation.
Yeah. I was raised by two lovely parents, my mom and my dad. They were great. And so I had lots of exposure to Christianity. I am very grateful for them, but throughout my high school years especially, I really strayed away from what they taught me. And it wasn't until first year of university, actually, that the Lord called me to himself, that he saved me. I was taking parts in all sorts of sins that are very common with young people. And so I got saved in my freshman year of undergrad. I'm now doing my master's, but so it was my first year of university, and so since then I've just been trying to follow Jesus every day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well said. And so the seeds were sown,
yeah,
and the seeds were grown.
Yes,
So parents,
exactly.
sow gospel seed. Christian parents, sow gospel seed,
Yes.
because God sovereignly grows that seed when he chooses to.
Exactly.
Right? And you've experienced that. Clearly, my suspicion is, like a lot of born-again Christians who have grown up in the church or around Christianity, it's like, wow, when I come to saving faith, all of those seeds that were sown sort of come flooding back, and they actually have eternal value, right? I mean, that's so huge.
Exactly, yeah. I can remember distinctly having conversations with my dad when I was much younger, and at that point not a Christian, but then all those conversations coming back to me and thinking all of those seeds that were planted really are now starting to show fruit. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Now, your dad's a really, really sharp guy. I mean, I've heard him teach, and he's very gifted. And so would you kind of push the faith a bit? Like when you have conversations with him, you're a thinker as well. Would you kind of ask him questions about the Christian faith? How did that look when you...
Yeah, certainly when I was in high school and I was wrestling with some of these things, I was always more conservative oriented. So red-pilled as the kids
culturally
would say.
Conservative.
Sure,
Fair
exactly,
enough. Yep.
exactly. Without the Christianity. So it had no foundation to it. But so when he's a sociologist, so he would often show, look at all of this evidence that supports the Christian position, the Christian worldview. But to me, someone who at that time had rejected Christianity, all of that I said, okay, it's true, but it's just not for me. It was something like that. So I was pushing back, but until God changed my heart, gave me a heart of flesh, it didn't resonate with me.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, we always talk about the danger of robbing God of his glory, first and foremost. But you're right. It's really one Christian apologist, a guy named Cornelius Van Til, brilliant man. He said, it's not as though non-Christians can't count. Sometimes they can count better than Christians. They just can't account for their counting.
Yeah.
There's no foundation.
Exactly.
Again, really, really true. So, how long have you been a Christian then, would you say?
So that's probably coming up on almost 6 years.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range. I don't know.
2017-ish, 2018?
20, somewhere 2019, 2020
Okay.
is when the Lord saved me. And so, yeah, I don't have the exact date, but yeah.
Fair enough. No, that's good. So, and you're a guy who's not, you're not tire kicking here, man. You're certainly a serious guy. You're a committed guy. So what would you say motivated you to step out in faith and get equipped for evangelism? I mean, you've been on the front line with myself and other equipping evangelists, so you're in the deep end of the pool here. What motivated you to do that?
I think it was probably a few things. So one, I think throughout Scripture, there's commands to be able to give your testimony, to give, as it says in 1 Peter, to tell the world the hope that's in you. So that sort of thing.
Yep.
So I knew that I needed to do this. And when I first became a Christian, I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it out of a church context, and I didn't really have a structure to it. So I was very blessed since coming to Crossroads, where there were people like you who had been doing this for a while, who had techniques to instill to me. So that, and then again, it was something that I've always enjoyed doing. So it was never something where I thought, oh, this is a bit of a burden, but I know I'm commanded to do it. I've always enjoyed talking to people about my Christian faith, which I know some people are more nervous to do that, but that's something for me. Even before I was a Christian, I liked talking about religion and politics, which a lot of people shy away from. So
yeah, and you're certainly you're a strong student, and we know that the best teachers were at one time the best students. That's true. And so you've also submitted yourself to a more, what I would call a more formal evangelism training plan, right? And so you've been walking with myself and other equipping evangelists. And so I would ask the question, how would you explain how hearing gospel conversations has helped you with having gospel conversations? I know that sounds maybe obvious for some people, but I think a lot of folks they expect themselves to get good at this. They expect themselves to be faithful. I don't think any other discipline of the Christian life is approached that way. We need to see and hear an example in order to become more faithful at prayer, at Bible study. Someone's got to show us. So how would you kind of like wrap that up?
Yeah, I think a few things. So one, and this is kind of cheesy, but there's a few lines that I've heard you say or others say where they really just, when you say it that particular way, it's not something I'd come up with, something that I've heard you say, and it's like, oh, that's one that I can use. So that's just a small thing.
That's true.
But there's some bigger things. So one, hearing other people have these conversations shows you that they're not always going to be perfect, or what we might understand as, oh, I shared the gospel and the person got saved right there, and oh, we were crying and praying together. You know, so it takes off a lot of pressure to know that ultimately it's going to be God who does this work in the person's life. And that was something that, for me early on, it was kind of daunting to think, oh boy, you know, I'm not going to do this perfectly. I don't have the words to say.
Right.
But hearing someone who has experience have these conversations, and even they will say, I've heard you say, like, you know, that wasn't perfect, but here's what I could have improved on, or something like that. That gives me, a newer guy, that gives me hope. And then the other thing, similar, is that no two conversations are the same.
Absolutely true.
They're all different. And so one, it's just that getting exposure over and over and over again to different conversations. But the other point to that is seeing that the conversations being different helps you to understand people differently, because no two people are alike. So you can't just, it's not a one size fits all. So you see that as well. So both those have been aspects of hearing the conversations that have helped me to have conversations, for sure.
Very true. Well said. And you know, we liken learning to share the gospel like learning to drive a vehicle. And as you drive with people for more miles on the road, you see all the bad habits as much as you see the good habits. We used to have this funny, we called it a 3-month guarantee. It was just a joke, but it was semi-serious that we would say, if you will walk with an experienced equipping evangelist for about 90 days, you will not be impressed in the least after that 90-day period. And I remember there was this young guy, about your age, who walked with me. He committed to 90 days, and we were halfway through our 90-day guarantee term here. And I remember we had talked to a stranger in the downtown core of our city, and as we walked away from that conversation, he had listened, he had learned, and he looked over at me and he said, boy, you sure botched that one. I mean, he was so unimpressed with me at this point because he'd heard lots of conversations. It is the same thing. I love it when we cross that threshold of, wow, Cory, you weren't perfect either. Or wow, Aiden, you weren't perfect either, because that shows a normalization's taking place. The wow factor is dissipated. It's like when you get together with a group of, you know, a group of experts in any field. They're not impressed with the other. They just do what they do. That's where we want to get people to. So that's super helpful. Now you are you're a young professional. What do you do?
So a couple things, I guess. I'm completing my master's in water engineering at Western, and then I also work part-time for an engineering firm in I do it remotely, but they're
Okay.
based out of London, Kitchener. They have a few offices.
Okay, so let's talk about living water engineering. How you like that?
That's
Yeah,
good.
just made that up.
That's clever.
Yeah, and so you're a young professional. You have a huge heart for having gospel conversations, specifically with young adults.
Yeah.
So we would generally say that's kind of like 18, 25, 30, somewhere in those thinking years. You know, as a young adults pastor over the years, I would say to the student base that if you were to put on a timeline the 18 to 25 window and you were to color code that thing, it would be blazing red hot with key decision making, critical decisions, what you're going to do for work, who you're going to marry, where you're going to live, where you might worship, all those things. So you were talking to a demographic, a space that a lot of people are kind of intimidated by, just because of where they live. So maybe you can testify, how do you start conversations with that group? How do you steer that? Do you do that on the job? Do you do that off the job? How does that all work for you week in, week out? And I know you wouldn't say every single day, man, I've got a target on the wall.
Right.
But I'm sure you have had opportunities to testify.
Yeah.
How's that went?
Certainly, yeah. And so obviously, like anytime you're sharing the gospel, it's always going to have mixed results. Some people are like, "Oh, tell me more," and some people are like, "Don't ever talk to me again."
Right.
And so there's
Have
been
you gotten that one?
Not that explicitly, but something similar.
There's a vibe.
Yeah,
eh?
exactly.
Yeah, sure enough.
So I find that for me, and this is great for anyone, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I would never start a conversation by, and you could, I'm not saying someone couldn't do this, but I would never start by saying, "Hey, let me just tell you the gospel right now." What I would normally try to do with, especially a colleague, is talk to them about something that interests them. So whether it's books they're interested in, or a TV show, or something where I can find some common ground, which is, again, something we've talked about before.
True.
And so finding common ground, something that we can have a mutual interest in. And I think part of this for any young person who would be wanting to share their faith, share the gospel, you have to know a few things. You can't just be a one-dimensional person. So you have to have had some life experience, and you have to know a little bit about culture.
Yep.
And the other thing is you got to just be, and it's a cliche, but be yourself. Don't try and be a stoic kind of serious. Just be who God has made you.
Yep.
And don't try and sell the person a kind of a lie or facade.
Yep.
And so I would just lead with having a conversation with a person. I was talking with a guy the other day, and I was asking him what books he likes, and he mentioned that.
Is that a common question?
I mean, yeah. I would say if I know someone likes sports or books, I'll kind of dive into that. And
I was
going to
ask if there's sort of like common questions. Are there things that, you know what, you can bank on the fact that if you bring up this subject that you're going to find something? Are there things like that?
Yeah, there's certainly. So one thing, if you ask someone how their weekend was, they'll normally say, and then if they're polite, they'll say, "How was your weekend?" And what I often try to say is, "Oh, well, I went to church."
Okay.
And even something as simple as that, you can kind of gauge, right? You can kind of gauge, because if they might totally shut down, and then that tells you something, or they might say, "Oh, you go to church." Okay. And that's a great way to start a conversation.
That's a great way. That gets the ball way up the field, right?
Sure I mean, it does require a bit of boldness, obviously. Yep. But another thing that's maybe unique to me, but I think many Christians, we tend to get married younger. So I'm married. I've been married for 10 months now, which has been amazing.
Congratulations.
And thank you. Yeah. And so for me, being in a unique position where I'm married and I'm 23 years old, when many young people are not, that I start by saying, "Oh, well, my wife," or "Well, I'm married," and then "You're married," and they're kind of taken aback. But then I can jump into, "Yeah, well, I'm a Christian," and then I go into. So
you would actually you would go that way with that?
Yeah, okay. I'm, and maybe for someone who's less comfortable, they might want to take it a bit slower. But yeah, for me, I would kind of lead with, well, the reason I got married young, the reason that was important to me, and then that gives me an opportunity to share my faith that way.
Very, very similar principles. I mean, the only difference when we're talking to a stranger is things move a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So we have to have quick ways of finding common ground. That's why we use good gospel tracts or, common questions that we ask and things like that. So in that sort of scenario, you thought of someone recent that you talked to, Aiden. So where would you go from there? So I'm a Christian. How would you sort of then continue that conversation? Ask what would you say then?
So I had a great conversation. This was maybe a month ago, And I was out on a job site, and I was talking with this guy. I won't say his name, but
Yep.
he a great guy, and raised with a bit of Christian background. And the topic of my marriage came up, and I was saying, yeah, I found this great woman in the church, and I was saying, if you are, because he was telling me that he was kind of interested in getting married. And I said, well, you're not going to find what you're looking for out in the world. And most guys, whether Christian or not, I think there's a sense that if they are really looking for a good woman, as we would understand a good woman, they might not find her out in the world where there's a lot of fornication and drinking and that sort of thing.
Right.
So I kind of said, have you ever thought about going to church? And so we started there, and he kind of was, I'm not sure, I don't know, I live a pretty crazy life. And I said, well, it's not about the life you live. It's about surrendering to Jesus. And he said, surrendering to Jesus, what does that mean? He had Catholic background.
Okay.
So, and I was then able to kind of go in from there, and we had a good conversation where I shared the gospel with him, and he had not heard it before, which was
wow.
Which was yeah.
And he's born and raised in Canada?
Yeah.
Okay, that's more. You would know that's more common. I shouldn't be that surprised because we talk to a lot of strangers as well.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more common.
Unfortunately, it is for sure. So he had some Catholic background, so he knew about the crucifixion, for example. So that was actually to my benefit, because then I don't have to explain, well, this is what a Roman cross is.
Totally, yeah.
That sort of thing. But that conversation went really well, where we've been able to talk a bit more about Christianity since then. So that was one of the more positive ones, I guess you could say.
Excellent. And so just some of the principles I want to grab a hold of here for anyone watching, listening, who's a young, maybe a professional or maybe a blue collar worker, whatever, who has a heart for young adults. Hopefully that's everybody that has a heart for young adults. But you've talked about certainly prayer and scripture, and you've talked about being a student of culture. That's really important. I mean, Jesus obviously pulled from everything around him.
Yeah.
Parables, and it was an agrarian society, so he was able to use illustrations, and that's really, really key. And as far as sort of those next steps, you talk about church a lot.
Yeah.
What do you find is the knee-jerk reaction when you mention church to a young adult? What's sort of the word association game?
Yeah, I think depending on their upbringing,
Okay.
it can elicit different emotions. But for most people, they think church and they think rules, or they think church and they think a set of instructions I have to follow. Those were the stuffy, stuck-up people
Okay.
are. I would say that by and large, that's kind of the understanding people have of church.
Okay.
For better or for worse, and I'd
Do
say
you
for
think,
worse.
would you say like it's more negative or more positive, or like what's the vibe when someone says, like, because your testimony led me to believe that when you mentioned church, the individual immediately went to, oh man, I've lived a crazy life. So there was this sort of like impression, it sounds like, of holiness,
Yeah.
of just, very, very conservative,
Yes.
and, keep your nose clean.
Yeah.
Because you're a conservative guy and you vibe that way, which is great, right? Get married young. We're all in. Okay, I think that's a great plan. I do.
Yeah.
But so in terms of that, would you say it's negative or positive?
I would say, it's okay as long as your church doesn't actually impact your life or doesn't require anything of this other person. Okay. So if I tell someone I go to church, they kind of, oh, that's kind of nice. But if I say I go to church and I would love for you to come with me, or I would love for you to repent and believe the gospel, believe the good news, that's a whole other ballgame.
Okay.
If my church is just kind of this abstract thing I do on Sundays, they don't really mind.
Right.
It's only when the church is going out into the world and trying to make disciples of all nations, as Jesus commands.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Obviously, everyone's fine with Jesus until you really follow him,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, I just want to say to anyone watching, if you've been trained by the Cross Current Ministry, if you've attended one of our evangelism training events, or maybe done the online Biblical Conversations curriculum, we would encourage you to share your evangelism training testimony to glorify God and to encourage others. You can do that by going to thecrosscurrent.com/testimony. Just wanted to get that in there. And so for anyone watching, Aiden, who is in your shoes, in your space,
Sure.
About your age, just surrounded by young adults, because my goodness, that is what many leaders have called the black hole
Yeah.
of the church right now. 18 to 25s, most of them are not coming back. how would you just encourage them to step out in faith and have that gospel conversation?
I think particularly for young men, that's who I can speak to best, it's so important for you to be sharing your faith regularly, not only because we're commanded to, but also it's one of the ways we as young men can cultivate a backbone. I think that that's one of the problems in the church today is a lot of men need to grow a spine. And so that's not always an easy thing to do, but for young men and for their future wives and their future children, being able to be bold in proclaiming the good news, where you're not afraid of what people are going to think, where you're not afraid of what the reaction is going to be. If you're able to do that, I mean, that's what makes Christianity unstoppable. So that would be why young men especially need to be doing this.
Love it. Men were built for battle. Are you in the battle? Are you a good soldier of Christ Jesus, making it your aim to please the one who enlisted you? Encourage you to do that. Aiden, thanks for stopping by, brother. And hey, I thank God for you, your partnership in his gospel, and for your faithfulness, man. Keep going and sowing.
Thank you.